I know what you're thinking. We just finished World War II, and here you see up here another Cold War. So you're thinking, what in the world? 60 million people die in World War II. It's a war that lasts 6 years. What are they doing getting themselves involved in another war? Well, this is a different type of war, and it has some different causes than the causes of World War I or World War II. It is something that should be somewhat confusing, because at the end of the war, what you see is the United States right here, soldier, and the Soviet Union soldier hugging, shaking hands. East over here meets West in Berlin, and Germany is done. And you would think that it would be all over, and that the United States and the Soviet Union would become friends and everything would be fine. But that doesn't end up being the case. Months, years go by, and the celebrations and the hugs end, and now the United States is making weapons called nuclear weapons, and they can cause very devastating casualties and blow up cities, and the Soviet Union is pointing and doing this too, and pointing these at the United States, and the United States is threatening the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. So what happened from here? Celebrations in Yalta, celebrations in Germany, to I'm going to blow you up if you mess with me. How did it get from here to here? And that's what we're going to look at today. I have some analogies to help you understand the Cold War, and if they work, good. If they don't, just ignore them. Here's the fish analogy. After World War II, you basically have two superpowers left. You have the United States, Bubba, right here, and then you have the Soviet Union, which is Vladimir right here. Before World War II, you had a couple big fish in the pond. After World War II, you only have two big fish in the pond, and all the other countries are these smaller fish. Now, the Soviet Union and the United States, they're not going to want to attack each other directly, because the Soviet Union and the United States are equal in size, and it would be a devastating war. So this is going to be a war about who can collect the most allies, who can collect the most friends. See all these little yellow fish? These are different countries all throughout the world. And the United States and the Soviet Union during this thing called the Cold War are going to compete over getting bigger alliances and more friends and more people to join their side. And the more alliances you have, the bigger chance and better chance you have of defeating either Bubba or Vladimir. Another analogy is you kind of see how the Cold War plays out in the show Survivor. You see the whole goal of this show is to form alliances. You see some of these alliances are made through threats, through friendships, through bribery. You'll see that all in the Cold War. Here's an Easter egg hunt. Here's another thing. Each of these eggs would represent countries in the world, and here is the United States. And the goal of the United States is to collect as most Easter eggs as the Soviet Union. He's another boy over here. And whoever collects the most eggs win. So the point I want to make through these three analogies is there's not going to be direct fighting between the United States and the Soviet Union. That's why the word cold is mentioned in it. It's a long hostility, but doesn't actually end up in direct fighting between these two sides. But fighting will occur. The fighting is going to occur with Bubba going after some of these yellowfish, because these yellowfish will be joining the Soviet Union, and vice versa. The Soviet Union might start a war, and let's picture Afghanistan or something like that, in order to have one of these yellowfish join their side by force. That's what the Vietnam and the Korean War were all about, keeping Vladimir from getting yellowfish. Now let's look at Europe after World War II. So let's start talking about this. You're going to see Europe after World War II. There's basically two sides. There's the communist side, and there's the non-communist side. And this shouldn't surprise you how this is the communist side, as the Soviet Union in World War II came this way in defeating Adolf Hitler, and the allies of Great Britain and the United States, the democratic countries, came this way. Well, this is where it ends up, Europe after World War II. And I will tell you this, the Soviet Union in this side of the war faces a lot more destruction. 50 times more casualties in the eastern part of Europe in World War II than the western part. So for every American that was killed, 50 Soviets were killed. Fatalities. Soviet cities like Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Warsaw and Poland saw so much more destruction. The Soviet Union saw so much more destruction compared to the United States. I mean, let's face it, the United States had the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean to protect them, so no American cities were bombed. No American factories. I mean, you had the military base Pearl Harbor, but that was it. So the Soviet Union is going to be ending this war thinking a lot about punishment. And the United States is going to be thinking a lot about forgiveness, because the United States is such an economic boom at this time. They want to keep that prosperity going. But before the war ends, they have conference. It's called the Yalta Conference, and there's 3 things I wanted you to really be able to understand about the Yalta Conference. The first thing is they decide to split Germany up. Okay, this is more what the Soviet Union wants. Joseph Stalin is at the Yalta Conference, and he wants to see Germany split up. 2 reasons. One, to punish Germany, but another reason why Germany has to get split up is because at this Yalta Conference, as you know, we have Churchill and Roosevelt. Churchill, the leader of Britain, and Roosevelt, the leader of the United States, are democratic. So you can't make Germany both democratic and communist. So in order to deal with that, they split it up. Western part is democratic, eastern part is communist. Another thing is they decided Germany has to pay money to the Soviet Union. This is kind of like Treaty of Versailles Part 2. And the third thing is Stalin promises free elections. When I say free elections, I mean elections that are not influenced by outside presence. So Stalin cannot get involved in these elections. What elections? Where? Eastern Europe, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Stalin promises to let the people of Poland and Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Eastern Germany decide the leaders that they want. Stalin had his fingers crossed just like Hitler did at the Munich conference. So that's the Yalta Conference. That was what was decided at the end of World War II. So things seem pretty good. Still shaking hands to some extent. No one's threatening blowing up each other. No one has nuclear missiles pointed at each other. And another thing that seems like, oh good, there isn't going to be a Cold War, there isn't going to be much tension, is this thing called the United Nations. The United Nations is in New York City. This is the building right here. This is the emblem. There's a thing about the United Nations that I really want you to be able to know. It's called the Security Council. And this Security Council, the whole goal of the Security Council is to really make the difficult decisions, investigating cases, settling disputes between countries, putting sanctions on countries. And there are 11 members, and there are 5 permanent members. And the 2 permanent members that always started to see at odds against each other were the United States and the Soviet Union. And I want you to know it only took 1 country to block a UN resolution. So if every country in the Security Council, this 11-member body, if 10 of them said yes, we're for this, but 1 of them says no, it can't get through. So while the UN has more teeth than the League of Nations, it still isn't able to do as much as they were hoping, because 1 dispute or 1 disagreement, UN couldn't enact. Okay? Well, the Soviet Union and the United States, I want you to understand the difference between these two that end up causing this conflict. And I'm going to go over the 4 right now. There are 4 really big disputes that end up causing the Cold War. One is the whole idea of democracy versus communism. The United States wants to see democracy grow to some extent, and the Soviet Union wants to see communism grow. As you know, the United States is going to have more influence in the democratic countries, and the Soviet Union would have more influence on the communist countries. It's an ideological battle. They also are going to start competing. This has nothing to do with ideology. Thank you. It deals with raw materials and markets. This is all about these 2 countries are going to start competing over who can be the wealthiest, who can have the most raw materials, who can have the most markets. Because if a country's communist, we're not going to be able to sell our goods to that country very easily, and vice versa. So go back to these pictures. Bubba and Vladimir, they're going to start competing over who can become bigger. And so it's not just going to be a battle between communism and democracy, it's also going to be an economic battle. They're going to compete on being number 1. Right now the Soviet Union are very big. They're going to start competing on, I want to be the biggest. I want to be the wealthiest. I want to be have the nation that's the most powerful economically. This is the biggest one in my opinion. Eastern Europe. This is the big dispute over Eastern Europe. The United States wants to see Eastern Europe rebuilt, stable, and have a free society where the United States can share goods. So Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, United States wants to see them democratic with U.S. coming in with much influence. So, you know, Poland can buy a Ford car. Hungary can end up buying a French fry at McDonald's because they're hungry. Romania can end up buying American products and things like that. The Soviet Union will have none of that. Stalin goes back on the Yalta Conference and will not allow free elections, and he wants to have great control in Eastern Europe, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the last thing is what to do with Germany. The Soviet Union wants to see Germany weakened, divided, less powerful. The United States wants to forgive and forget. It's much easier for us to forgive and forget when we didn't lose so many men compared to the Soviet Union, and we got this big body of water called the Atlantic Ocean that separates us from us and Germany. Stalin's going to say we're never going to allow that to happen again. Let's go to number 3 and focus on that, because the third thing deals with something called the Iron Curtain. Stalin wanted a buffer, and when I talk about buffer, I mean protection. He wanted to make sure France, Great Britain, Germany, no other country could come in and weaken the Soviet Union. So in order to do that, he has this buffer. It's Eastern Europe right in here. These countries are going to become buffers to protect the Soviet Union from this negative democratic capitalistic influence. So if West Germany, France, and Great Britain never decided to attack the Soviet Union, they would have to go through 2 countries, East Germany and Poland, or Czechoslovakia and Poland. It's basically a means of protection. And so in order to protect and allow no outside influence into Eastern Europe, there's this symbolic speech by Winston Churchill, and it ends up becoming known as the Iron Curtain. And this is the Iron Curtain right here. Basically, it's a symbolic idea that no outside influence, whether culturally, socially, politically, can ever come in here, and Stalin is going to end up having complete control of Eastern Europe. They're going to be known as puppet governments or satellite nations. These puppet nations are basically as puppets. They're controlled, and the puppet master is Joseph Stalin, and then Khrushchev and the other Soviet leaders down through the line. This is the big dispute. The United States wants to see East Germany, Poland, and all these different regions free from Stalin and the Soviet control. Soviet Union is like, no way, we lost too many men during World War II. We're not going to give up that land that we fought so dearly for. We need protection, and there are buffers. Alright, so that's the ideological conflict. There's 4 of them. So how does it play out? What does this look like? First thing I want you to know on how this plays out is the United States is not going to attack the Soviet Union because, and by the way, the new leader is Harry Truman, President Truman. Truman is not going to say, okay, I'm going to attack you, Soviet Union, for not giving free elections to Poland, for not giving free elections to Yugoslavia. He realizes by now the nuclear missiles are created, it would be crazy to do that. So Vladimir and Bubba are going to have to, again, compete over these smaller regions to get larger in power. And let me talk about that so you're not confused. The United States is going to have this idea called containment. And basically the United States is going to say, fine, okay, you're going to have control of Poland and East Germany, you're going to have control of Eastern Europe, but you're not going to spread communism. And we're going to do whatever it takes to stop the expansion of communism. So basically Truman says, you're not spreading the curtain this way, or down here. We're going to do whatever it takes to stop you from spreading to these regions. And the United States has a number of things to try to stop the game. 2 things called the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan were all about giving money to countries like Great Britain, France, Italy, even Greece, Turkey. That would be the Truman Doctrine for money to Greece and Turkey. But all this money is basically, as you can see in the political cartoon, for economic recovery, to make these democratic countries strong and powerful so communism can't take them over and the people do not want to become communists. So you could say we kind of bribe these countries to some extent to be democratic. we're at least helping them rebuild their country so the people are happy with democracy. Another thing is making our side strong. We came up with NATO. Okay, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We're just going to call it NATO. And basically it says any attack on a NATO member would be met with armed force by all member nations. So if a communist country ever attacks Italy, all of these green countries say we'll team up, and the United States is over here across the Atlantic, will team up to help Italy. That's another way to help containment. So the Soviet Union knows if we touch any democratic country, we're gonna have to deal with all these other NATO countries. So it's never going to be one versus one. It's going to be a nasty war. So in response, the Warsaw Pact was created, and this Warsaw Pact was all communist countries bind together. And if anyone messes with a communist country, all these communist countries will help. By the way, keep in mind these countries right here are being controlled by Joseph Stalin. They really don't have a choice. They have to join Warsaw. Yugoslavia, Switzerland, Austria, these countries all stay, Spain, they stay neutral. They're saying we're not getting involved in this Cold War thing at all. So we got ways of containment. Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, NATO, Warsaw Pact. Those are all ways in which the United States originally tried to keep the Soviet Union from spreading. But the point is, the Iron Curtain is in. There is no outside influence coming in. Stalin wants complete control of these regions and communism to work and thrive and not be influenced by the outside. That's the onset of Cold War. I tried to do it as fast as possible. I don't think I left anything out. This conflict is a big conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union that will only grow in time.